Hey everybody, Phantom here. Today we are going to be talking about the OceanGate that happened before OceanGate. That's right, this has historically happened at least one other time. I will be comparing the similarities and differences towards the end of this video, but for now we're just going to break down the history of Horace Hunley and the H.L.Hunley submersible. Specifically, 163 years ago, a man named Horace Hunley was born in Summer County, Tennessee, to his mother, Louisa Hardin Lawson, and his father, John Hunley. Horace Hunley went on to study at the University of Louisiana. After relocating to New Orleans, Horace then went on to study law and eventually passed his bar exam. He was officially admitted to the bar in 1849, where Horace would go on to serve the Louisiana State Legislature. Unfortunately, around this time, the American Civil War had just kind of started to kick off, which posed a lot of complications nationwide, as you can imagine. Anybody who's learned about the Civil War knows that a lot was going on all at once. It basically blew up. Country was split in two. There were like separate governments that were starting to happen. It was a wild, wild time. And so this resulted, like I said, in a lot of complications nationwide. And one of those complications was that there was a Union blockade in the southern part of America that led to the southern government offering up a $50,000 bounty to anybody who could effectively sink a Union warship. Now you can understand why this would be enticing. At the time, economies were in shambles, particularly the South, as they struggled to keep up with the Union, because with a blockade, you can't ship cotton and you can't do any sort of slave trade or anything like that basically had the southern economy booming at the time. So with a $50,000 bounty online, a lot of people were kind of invested in this idea, but there wasn't a whole lot that could be done from poorer citizens such as farmers. They didn't have the money or the resources, which meant that this initial bounty was more for rich people than it was for poor people, because people like Horace Hunley had a lot of money and could invest in the resources needed in order to create something or get the finances for soldiers and warships needed to go blow up Union warships. They had the money, they had the fame, they had the name, they had everything that the poor people of the South didn't, and so they were going to go collect on these $50,000 bounties. Now, originally there wasn't a whole lot that was done by it until a man named Reverend Franklin Smith started publishing this $50,000 bounty in newspapers, basically saying, hey guys, here's something that might get this started. You should look into submarine warfare. And this really piqued Horace Hunley's interest, and he contacted engineers James R. McClintock and Baxter Watson, and from there, as Hunley pumped money into these two, they created a submarine called the Pioneer. This submarine was incredibly small. It was only 3 feet long and 4 feet wide in diameter, and all things considered, it could only really fit 2 people inside, and even that was a tight squeeze. It had a captain, and it had somebody that would manually rotate the propeller in order to get the submarine to move. In order to weaponize the submersible, in order to take out these Union warships in order to get their $50,000 bounty, which, mind you, was a crap ton of money back then. I mean, it's still a lot of money in today's standard. I can't even fathom $50,000. But back then, that was like millions and millions of dollars. Anyways, I digress. Back to the point. In order to weaponize the submersible, there was an explosive that was kept on board that would be attached to the hull of a Union warship and then exploded with some sort of clock piece or like timepiece. So basically like a timer bomb, but like old-fashioned. That's essentially what it was. So that's kind of what they were working with. Very rugged weaponry as far as modern standards go. In order to blow up Union warships effectively, they couldn't just throw this submarine into the ocean and hope for the best. They actually had to test it, and so they took it to the Mississippi River and then later Lake Pontchartrain, I think that's how you pronounce it, and that is where the Pioneer underwent a lot of vigorous testing, and it reportedly blew up a schooner. It effectively sunk a schooner. Now, this isn't a big, massive Union warship, but it is progress, and it was definitely promising for Hunley and the engineers. They were very excited about it. Unfortunately for them, Union forces were advancing on southern territories at this time, particularly New Orleans, and so they had to do this thing called scuttle their ship. And for those who don't know, scuttling is essentially sinking your own ship to prevent it from being captured. Because at this time, the North was also working on a submarine for themselves. And so this was kind of like the space race before the space race. It was Southerners versus Northerners, both of which were trying to get a submarine before the other because that would really help them in their war, their side of the war. It would either give the Southerners an edge or it would give the Northerners the edge. It was Union versus Confederacy at this point. Like, all ties were off, brothers against brothers, dads against sons. I mean, it was a mess. So the official date that the Pioneer was scuttled or the Pioneer sank was on April 25th, 1862, and it is said to have sunk in the New Basin Canal. Now, driven by the Pioneer's initial success, Horace Hunley, James R. McClintock, and Baxter Watson set forth to build another vessel. As far as they were concerned, there was no reason to stop given the success of Pioneer. At this point, they knew that they could get something that could relatively work. So what they did is they upped the scale of the vessel and made something known as the H.L.Hunley. Now, in principle, this sub should have operated as well as the previous one, only this sub was much larger than its predecessor. It was still only about, I think the diameter was still only about 4 feet, but this one was 40 feet long. So very much a different size compared to the little like tin can that was floating around in the Mississippi River. This was like a full-scale submarine that could now fit 7 soldiers inside of it on top of a captain. And now, if you remember previously, Pioneer could only fit 2 people inside of it, so this was definitely quite the upgrade. Unfortunately, this upgrade meant that if the submarine failed, that more lives would be lost than just 2 lives, as would have happened on the Pioneer. And oh boy, did this sub fail. The first 2 attempts to use the H.L.Hunley ended in disaster. It led to the vessel sinking both times and killing crew members. The first time that the H.L.Hunley sunk, it's not documented the exact number of deaths, but a majority of the crew perished. And then on the second attempt, all crew members perished, which means that within the first 2 attempts of launching this vessel, approximately 10 to 16 people died. It is important to note that on the second launch, Hunley himself was aboard the vessel acting as captain, and that is the trip where all 8 crew members perished. Now, you would think this would be enough to call it off. The main financier of this whole project is now dead in the wreckage of a ship that he helped build, but alas, it's wartime, and they just dredged the submarine back up, filled it up again with new people, and said, all right, boys, get to it. Like, third time's the charm, right? It was to a certain extent, because on the third time, the H.L.Hunley vessel survived its initial launch. It did not sink right away like it did the other 2 times, and it actually succeeded in sinking a Union warship. After launching a spar torpedo, which was basically the main form of weaponry that they had at this time, upgrade from like the little package bomb that they had previously, when the spar torpedo detonated, it was lodged in the USS Housatonic. I have a hard time pronouncing that. I'm sorry. I apologize. But the USS Housatonic sank within 5 minutes, which is an incredibly fast time. And while this was the first time a submarine had ever successfully sunk a warship, tragedy struck again. Not only were lives lost on the sinking of the Union warship, the H.L.Hunley never actually returned to dock that day. It never came back from its mission, and it sunk again. No one has been able to figure out how the sub sank after all these years, but there is one theory that seems to be pretty generally accepted, that when they blew up the USS Housatonic, they couldn't get away fast enough, and their vessel was damaged in the process, leading to it sinking again. Today, the wreck of the Hunley is preserved in a tank of water at the Warren Lash Conservation Center in North Charleston, South Carolina. Now, I do want to note something important, which is that up until this point, like I said, no warship had ever been sunk by a submarine. So that was, objectively, it's cool. It is very sad that so many people lost their lives. but it did advance and change war as we know it. So, as you can see, this is a very tragic story. And perhaps it's not as hotly debated as the Titan submersible, which was OceanGate's tragic submarine accident that's been all over the news. But both, in my opinion, are one for the history books because it's very obvious as we get into the similarities here that history has, in a way, repeated itself. First things I want to say is that it can be said that the deaths of the crew members on the Hunley sub were for the greater good, but that in and of itself is a pretty controversial statement. As I said, they were they were with the South, and South, a lot of the South, I should say, not everybody, but a lot of the South at the time were big proponents of slavery because that held up their economy. And anybody in their right mind now knows that slavery is wrong. A lot of the things that people of color endured back then were unjust and horrendous and should never be repeated or ever accepted again in any way whatsoever. And similarly, with the Titan, a bunch of billionaires ended up dying. And that in and of itself is also controversial because in a lot of ways, billionaire ethical billionaires don't really exist because nobody accrues that kind of money who should have that kind of money. The way it was explained to me is that people who become billionaires are not the type of people who treat others well, just, or ethically in a lot of ways. Because somebody who has the potential to become a billionaire but is a good person and gives their money away and makes sure that people have fair wages and are living good lives while working for them, they lose the money that would have gone into making them a billionaire. Millionaires, it's still a lot of money, but it's like, okay, like maybe you just got lucky, you do have good business practices, are you treating your employees right? You get into the billionaire sort of area and it's like, how ethical is it? In both cases, no matter the controversy, people did die. And I think at the end of the day, that needs to be recognized as a tragedy. I don't think anybody should ever lose their life in an accident that is as horrible as a submarine either sinking or imploding on itself. I don't want I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy because I can only imagine how terrifying that was. Additionally, it's important to note that both of these submarines were made by rich, wealthy individuals who, in my opinion, didn't really have any business in making submarines. It was seen as opportunistic and a way to get money. You have rich people paying $250,000 to go see the Titanic on the Titan submersible. Well, now you have people in, the American Civil War building submarines that really have no business in building submarines because they want a $50,000 bounty if they can manage to go blow up a Union warship. Again, one was during a time of war, so it does make it a little bit different. People were just basically willing to do anything so long as they won. But at the same time, the similarities are hard to ignore. In both instances, people who had a direct hand in creating the submersible perished on the vessel. In the H.L.Hunley case, it was Hunley. And in the Titan case, I can't remember the names of the two men. I think it was two men, but they both perished as well, along with a bunch of other like innocent people from what we know and what we understand. So what I hope we can learn from this is one, human technology is fallible. It is completely and totally fallible. We put a lot of faith and a lot of trust in the technology that we use, and to a certain extent that's fine. That is perfectly fine. A lot of the technology that we use today has been tried and tested and has held true over time. But I ask people to do research first and foremost on the things that you are going to go participate in. Whether it is a submarine adventure or not, research the technology that is being used, how reliable it is, and be aware of the people who made it. Because sometimes the people who make these things have vested interests not in your safety. In both cases, the vested interest was wealth and money. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of tragedies happen. That's how the Titanic kind of happened in the first place. It was, oh, well, this technology is infallible. We made the biggest boat ever. We're going to make a lot of money. It'll be great. And then the Titanic sank. Oh, well, we're going to make this really cool submarine by ourselves. $250,000 a visit. And then it sank. oh, well, we're going to make this submarine that can go blow up Union warships so we can get $50,000 like all the time. And then it sank 3 times. So you see a bit of a pattern here, is what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, as tragic as it is, I hope more than anything that we can learn from this. And since it has happened once previously in history, and it has happened yet again, that we don't repeat this. Please, because it is not worth it in my opinion. No matter who was involved and who died and how controversial it was, at the end of the day, people did die. And it was at the fault or at the hands of wealthy individuals who were doing things above their means in areas that they shouldn't have really been dabbling in. And I think that's kind of the key takeaway here. So I just want to say thank you guys for sitting through this video with me. Thank you for watching. If you want more content like this, please consider hitting the subscription button. Leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what your opinion is on the matter. And let me know if you learned something new. Because I didn't know about the H.L.Hunley submersible until recently. And I think it was really cool to investigate and learn about. And it really opened my eyes on what we are dealing with as a society when it comes to predatory behaviors for the sake of money. Again, thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys in the next